Number one mistakes that buyers and sellers are making when it comes to their contract close date. Hi everyone, Edna Kimble. Okay, so we're just going to jump in. So it's 2025 and I've been talking about this since 2000, since 2000. So for 25 years I've been talking about this, but it's a real thing. So let's talk about that. So the big problem that buyers and sellers really struggle with is that the closing date on the contract, that is basically just a target date. If I'm working with a buyer, when I sit down with the buyer, we put the offer together, we just do kind of a standard 40-day closing. Now, sometimes a buyer will just be like, I need to close as soon as possible. And in that case, we'll get crazy and we'll put 35 days for closing. And then we take it and send it to the seller side. We present it to the seller and the seller looks at the date, hopefully. Sometimes the seller blanks out and forgets that they're out of the state on that day or out of the country. And they will either accept it as that date or they will then modify it and say, no, we can't close on that day. We'd like to close on this day. So that is between the buyer and the seller. But at the end of the day, that is not who determines the actual close date. The actual close date is determined by the title company and the lender once everything is finalized. So if we got crazy and we started putting 35 days on every single contract, that would be a complete disaster. So the reason that's a complete disaster is it's almost impossible to close in 35 days in our market where we do deal with abstracts. The other problem that you run into is that if you have a 10 or 13-day home inspection, then you are basically about 15 to 18 days into the contract for negotiations. So then you've got 10 days to wrap up the home. Is that math right? Yeah. About 10 to 15 days to then pack and get out of the home. It just doesn't make sense for everyone to make things move that quickly. Now, I know what you're saying is, well, what if the home is vacant? Still, it can be an issue because until the lender and the title company has ordered the appraisal and the title work has come back and the underwriter has reviewed everything, that is not a guarantee. So make sure that when you're working with your realtor, if you're a buyer, that you chat with them about the urgency of closing date and make sure that you don't go so aggressive that it's not even physically possible for the abstract to be brought up, for the appraisal to be completed, for the survey to be completed. All of these things have to be completed prior to closing or you're not going to close. And here are some of the issues that happen when that goes down. So for the buyer, a buyer will lock in a moving date with the moving company and lock in the U-Haul. And here's the problem with that. A lot of those are non-refundable dates and times, and or there is a fee to change the date and time. So you've just locked that in and now it's not actually going to be physically possible to close on that date. The second is, and this one to me is probably the biggest, is you give the landlord a drop dead date that you're going to be out, and then the closing doesn't happen, and the landlord has already rented your property to someone else, and they feel bad for you, but they need to move on. You're the one who gave notice. They've already rented it to someone else and they're in a contractual obligation, and your obligation, their obligation to you has ended. So now you are in a short-term rental or a hotel with all of your stuff packed in a U-Haul. And guys, when you extend the time frame for the U-Haul truck, that is very, very expensive because the same thing happens. They may have rented that same truck to someone else, and even though your stuff is in it, they need it back because it's on its way to Utah. So be careful and mindful of that. And then the last is just anything that's non-refundable, whether that's non-refundable movers or non-refundable flights because you're going to fly here for the closing, anything that you cannot completely get out of or change easily, you want to be super, super mindful of that because no one is going to reimburse you for that money. It's just money that's gone. Now, for the seller, one of the mistakes that the seller makes is the seller goes in and starts shutting off all of the utilities and stating that they're not going to make the payment for that month. So here's the problem with that. You've just shut off the utilities, whether it's extremely hot or extremely cold. Now you can have problems with the house. Also, our state contracts state that the seller will leave the utilities on through the date of closing so that the buyer can then walk back through the home and make sure everything is in normal working order. So if they show up and it's 105 degrees inside the home, and there's no lights, you've got a delay. And sometimes it can take a full 24 hours to get those things turned back on. And then again, if it's on a Friday, then you've got a host of other issues. It's really more concerning during the cold temperatures because pipes can freeze and burst because you allowed the utilities to be shut off. Regardless, on our contracts, you're actually required to leave them on through closing. So what I tell my sellers is do not shut off the utilities until you have received your proceeds check. We learned that really the hard way during COVID because we would be scheduled to close at 9 a.m. on a Friday. Everybody was great. And then someone woke up on Friday morning and tested positive for COVID. And now we're not closing. And it just became a great big mess. And at the end of the day, there are no guarantees, even though, thank goodness, we're through the worst of all of that COVID stuff. Maybe not. I hear someone coughing. The other problem that buyers and sellers don't think about when you do an aggressive contract close date for 35 days, and then there is some challenges between the buyer and seller, maybe they get sideways with negotiations on inspections or something. Guys, when that contract close date hits the 35th day, we have to have all parties agree to an extension. And we have had situations where it was really difficult to get one or the other party to sign off. Yes, there are some obligations built in and some requirements built in, but at the end of the day, if someone's not willing to sign, it can cause massive problems. It can be expensive to actually try to get them to follow the contract guidelines. So overshooting that just to be overshooting it doesn't make sense. Let's put realistic timelines on there. Smart moves, talk to your lender, talk to the realtor, get a good understanding. Has the home sold, 3 or 4 times within the last 15 years? Your chances of title work going smoother, are there maybe built-in surveys that could be reused? There's some things that you can do to verify how realistic this close date is. To me, one of the number one red flags is a realtor from out of area wanting to use a title company from out of area. I can almost guarantee you it's not going to close on time in that situation. So be mindful of it. Have a conversation with the realtor and with the lender before locking in a contract close date. And then again, be mindful that the realtor and the lender cannot guarantee it. It will pretty much depend on all of the processes happening in a timely manner. Second thing, smart move, is understand that when you sign at closing, that does not mean that it's funded at that time. So what we see here is maybe a buyer comes in and signs at 8 a.m. on a Friday morning, but the seller cannot sign until they get off work at 4 p.m. Now we've got a problem. And the reason is most wire cutoffs are at 4 p.m. So most likely that seller is not going to give you access to the home on Friday afternoon, which means that all of your stuff in the U-Haul is not going to be in that home until Monday. So really understanding what is the contract close date? Do you have to schedule it for a Friday? Can you schedule it for a Thursday or a Monday to avoid some of these last minute hiccups and delays? And then obviously always try to have a plan B. And what that looks like, if you've given notice to your landlord, ask if there's any way that you could have like a 10-day flex period. Yes, it may cost you money, but at least it's already built in and it's not a last minute surprise. Because on the last minute, if you're scrambling trying to find a Airbnb, short-term rental, storage unit, movers, friends to help you move, guys, that is not a good thing, because then you're moving it twice. You're moving it from your current location to a temporary location, and then having to move it from the temporary location to your new home. So maybe paying your landlord for a little bit of a flex period makes more sense in the long run, and it will be far less stressful for you, okay? Bottom line, closing days are stressful, and anything that you can do to be prepared and not put your situation out there where you just have no options. Because when you are in a no option situation, that is the most stressful scenario, and it typically tends to not end well for one party or the other. So be sure and have these conversations up front. Understand that it is just a target date, and hopefully we can avoid a lot of these last minute expenses and hiccups and frustrations. Hope that helps, and thanks for the question. Please like, follow, and share.